Hello, welcome to a new video. This one is also made for Pixel Daily's theme. This time the theme was glade, and after doing a bit of search online I found out what it was because I didn't know the meaning of the word. So I decided to make a scene in which the composition gets taken on a swirl. So you start on your top left corner and then you look down and you're brought back up to the at least to the left, sort of center left. And this is my sketch for the environment that I want. And what I like to do when creating a landscape like this is I like to create a base color that kind of has the mood that I want for the image. So if it's a happy image, if it's a warm image, I like to use kind of warm colors, bright oranges, red, stuff like that. In this case, I wanted something to be a little bit gloomy, sort of like a sort of idyllic place or a melancholy place. But the idea was that I started off with this green with a bit of tint of yellow, and then I create the shadow for the trunk right there because it's really close to the camera. And then what that bright color is going to be my sort of my place to put in the elements that will draw the eye in the end, lastly. So basically you start off and you do a bit of a swirl back. Now to keep the viewer from looking too far into the corners, I add these shapes which are going to be bushes in the end. And I'm playing around with these colors. Now for the trunks, what you don't really see now is that these are actually kind of purple gray colors. And I'm sort of trying to figure out how I'm going to do the depth for the scene. Because when something has these many elements, if you don't get the depth correctly, it just might end up like a wallpaper or a pattern that doesn't really convey any sort of space. And that's why I'm sort of obsessed with the idea of doing this in layers and gradually making the colors brighter. Because if I make the colors gradually brighter, they will start being drawn to that hot spot, to that bright place there at the left center. And if I do that, if I'm successful in doing that, it'll create the idea of transition, of movement towards that place. So it gives an idea of space, of two-dimensionality space. Now for the lighting, I decided to have like a late afternoon sunlight by which the sun is going to be off to the side, a little bit to the top diagonal. And that's going to allow me to add in some God rays in the end. And I also tint those lights a little bit more towards the orange rather than just a sort of yellowish green, which was what it was initially. Now I put in this, it's not really bark texture because I'm really just sketching things in, but it's kind of useful because it creates the palette itself. It gives you a nice notion of what your color range is going to be. And in this case here, I'm doing some grass with some noise by using a brush that I have set up on Photoshop, which is really not complicated, but it just creates basically vertical lines. And there I was just mixing colors to create that second step of color further down in this, what would be a path through the forest. These shapes that I drew just going to convey the idea of canopy and are going to help me to start laying out the terrain, because right now it's still a little bit clumsy. I mean, the composition is kind of there. You're constantly drawn back from the big tree trunk on the left to the right side. You have that sort of swirling motion, and composition is something that I always struggled with starting out, and I'm by no means an expert, but at least now I take a deliberate approach to it. I try things. I don't just let the drawing draw itself. I actually try and place things where I want them to be in order to try and convey a different composition. And that sort of changes your approach to developing pieces. You're not anymore just, I want to draw this or I want to draw that. You actually take a moment to think about what people will do when they look at your images. So to the right there, what we have is basically a grass hill going up to the right. And I add some tree trunks there and some canopy, some leaves to give an idea that that's going to be really dark. That was me just adding a little bit more grass, again, to convey the same lighting as I have on the right. Because on the left there, on the near plane, where the tree trunk is, there's a little bit of brighter grass, right? And this is me just talking about how I want to add pools of light in the end, which in the end I end up not doing pools of light everywhere. I just do it on the grass that is further away. But the idea is that you you convey the same lighting throughout the scene so that you get that notion that these objects are all the same and they have different colors just because they have different lighting conditions. So for example, the grass is a little, the trees are a little greener because they're not getting the direct light from the sun. They're getting the light reflected from the grass up onto the trees. And that's why they aren't as brown or as you would see. Adding that extra layer there of detail really helps create steps in the depth of this forest scene, almost like if you're going through a tunnel. Now the colors themselves are not in the correct contrast. I think the range of colors is okay, but some of them are actually too dark, close to the other ones, and I want to fix that. As you might have already seen, right now I'm not really taking that much care of using pure pixel art techniques, by deliberately placing all the pixels and being really careful. I'm actually sketching in the drawing. I'm just making sure that I'm using one pixel brush with no soft brushes at all, just a hard edge pencil brush to keep the look sharp. But there's really no complicated decision about size that I'm making. I'm really just painting with no constraints. And I suppose that I could do this in other formats, like digital painting, for example. But I just feel that this is this sort of charm with pixel art and how much this reminds me of old video game backgrounds. I think it's more what it does than just giving me another chance to do an illustration, which, is not really something that's going to make me interested in doing this. On the bottom here, I'm adding a little bit of blades of grass, and the idea is that they have these bright highlights so that you look there. That's all it's doing. It's for you to look down the trunk, fix your eyes there, and then be drawn back up to the lighter center of the image. But I'm still going to add detail on the bush on the right so that you get drawn back to the bush and then to the tree trunks that I'm painting right now, and then back onto the center of the image. I'm showing here also that we can use layer styles afterwards, or layer adjustments afterwards to change the palette, change the tone of the image. Actually, adjustment layers, not layer adjustments. And these can be done if you have a good enough palette and if you feel comfortable in the colors that you've chosen. You can go ahead and try different moods. I mean, there's no stopping you from making this a little warmer or darker. So on a new layer here, what I'm doing is I'm adding leaves to close up branches, and this allows me to put in some really bright leaves, which suggests that they're getting some sunlight. And it's interesting because then you get this this effect of overdrawing on the images that you already had, or the parts of the image that you already had, which is not only a way to add more layers and more information, but also gives a sense of more density, that there's more elements and that things are coming alive a little bit better. And I started out, I'll admit that I started out fairly scared with this drawing because I wasn't really feeling it was coming out well. And as I started adding these leaves, it kind of came together, almost like the rug in Big Lebowski, but it came really helped the image. So again, I was going for this kind of painterly, almost like a classic painting look. I think some of the parts of the image have that element of almost like a classical painting. But overall, it just really wanted to follow the theme and try a cool composition. I do the same thing here on the near trunk with the leaves, getting some sunlight, but because they're so close, I kind of feel that they don't really shade well, and it almost looks like it's too exaggerated. So I have to do a few really bright and then a few really dark. I have to kind of play around with the directions of the leaves, and I also take the highlight tone down a little bit. Now I made a mistake that I painted over the background and I kind of ignored because I'm looking everywhere else except for there, and then in the end it pops up to bite me. But basically just by doing that, I'm cutting the eyesight of people. They're not going to go through the leaves, they're going to go through the trunk. They're going to look at the leaves, they're going to go through the trunk, look back at the bush, and then look back at the center. The God rays effect is basically just me copying the whole layers and then making the levels on that piece of layer a little bit brighter, and then just picking this brighter green here and paint it on that specific area. I think the direction that I'm choosing for the sun isn't 100% correct with the light that I've put on the trees. I think it should be a little lower, but that would be a lot more pieces of layers to cut through, and I was really not confident that I would be able to do it in the time that I've set myself to do it, which is sort of an hour. This was about 45 minutes. But again, it's so scribbly, and it's basically just a speed paint. It's almost not pixel art in the true sense. So I'm adding here some kind of realistic cuts to the bush, which I'm basically opening it up, drawing the branches, and then drawing the leaves to sort of have it be a bit more realistic in terms of what it looks like and how it's supposed to be. So this is the complete image. It came out really nice. I was happy with this, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned something. So take care of yourselves. Goodbye.